You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
The 2026 Chevy Equinox is more than an SUV. It's your Sunday tailgate and your parking lot snack bar. Your lucky jersey, your chairs, and your big cooler fit perfectly in your even bigger cargo space. And when it's go time, your 11.3-inch diagonal touchscreen's got the playbook, the playlist, and the tech to stay a step ahead. It's more than an SUV. It's your Equinox. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
Amazon presents Jeff versus Taco Truck Salsa. Whether it's Verde, Roja, or the orange one. For Jeff, trying any salsa is like playing Russian roulette with a flamethrower. Luckily, Jeff saved with Amazon and stocked up on antacids, ginger tea, and milk. Habanero? More like habanero, yes. Save the everyday with Amazon.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Thank you so much.
Join our Patreon for extra episodes, interviews, extra content, and to help support the podcast and help us continue to do the work we do.
Go to patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl to learn more.
The Italians didn't fucking wreck the Republic, man. The fucking Romans did.
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl. We are so thrilled to welcome a special guest today, Mike Duncan, the host of the award-winning The History of Rome and Revolutions podcast, author of the New York Times best-selling books The Storm Before the Storm, and hero of two worlds, the Marquis de Lafayette in the Age of Revolution. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for ages. We're so excited to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to be.
Hi, this is Future Jen.
And Future Jenny.
And we're time traveling in to let you know that we've recorded this episode on February 18th, 2026. As I'm sure you all know, the news changes so incredibly fast. And one thing that we're learning is that we always have to let you know when we record things because a lot of the time it's a few weeks to a few months before we drop something.
Yeah, so when we recorded this, the war in Iran had not happened yet. There are some parts of this episode where we talk about the military, and the war in Iran would absolutely have been part of this conversation if that had happened by then, but it had not. We do think that the points that we were making were still valid and important, but just bear in mind when we were recording this, it was before the war in Iran happened.
And I think in some ways, a lot of these episodes immediately have become historical archives, right?
It's just because we're now talking a lot more about current events than we usually did. And that's just part of it, you know?
Also, we're actually recording this disclaimer on April 8th, 2026. And this episode will be dropping on April 23rd. Potentially, we have no idea what's going to happen between now and then because the news is changing really, really rapidly and our government is super unstable and we're all trapped in this 2026 hellscape. So if something even more drastic happened from the recording of this disclaimer to when the episode drops, I don't know. Good luck, y'all. Break out the wine or the THC sodas. That's all I can tell you.
Enjoy the episode, and thank you so much for listening.
This is the beginning of our series called How Democracy Dies, and we are taking a look at the steps and stages in which democracies, particularly the Roman democracy, crumbled and eventually turned into an autocracy. For absolutely no reason have we chosen to do this right now at this time period, looking at what's going on in America. No reasons at all. None. And so we were thrilled to have Mike Duncan here to talk about the generational impact of the desecration and demolishment of democracy in ancient Rome. And ancient Rome, as we all know, is something that a lot of people who structured our American democracy seem to have a real big boner for.
So when we look at the demise of Roman democracy, the big players in that story are often said to be Caesar, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, Augustus, Pompey, Crassus, Cicero, Cato, Fulvia, etc., etc. I could go on. But in reality, destroying democracy was a multi-generational project. In fact, the Roman Republic started its decline much earlier, and it's probably not too far out on a limb, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to say that Caesar couldn't have grabbed so much power if there hadn't been a Sulla or a Marius or the Gracchi brothers or a numerous other revolutionaries and power players of centuries before. That is the subject of Mike's book, The Storm Before the Storm, and that is what we have gathered here today to talk about, how the seeds of Rome's destruction were laid much earlier than Augustus's reign. Maybe they were even built into its very foundations.
I'm certainly not going to correct that. That sounds great.
That sounds about right?
That sounds exactly like the thesis of a book I once wrote.
It's a little bit familiar. So let's start at the beginning. How would you say was the Roman democracy supposed to work? Like, what was the ideal of that? And what problem were the first Romans trying to solve for when they created their democracy? Like, what was their nightmare scenario that they were trying to prevent?
Well, when they founded the Republic, the nightmare scenario seemed to simply be the return of the kings. Right, that first generation of the Republic, I mean, if you go into Livy and sort of like if you buy into some of like the mythical stories representing at least something like what happened, is there was like an Etruscan dynasty that had moved into Rome and was ruling it. And so the rich landowners who, formed the Senate threw the king out. And then they set up a system such that the old Etruscan kings would not come back and no Roman would then become king. It would be a shared, it was res publica, right? The thing of the people. And the system that they set up, the idealized version of it, if you take like what Polybius kind of said about it, is it's a mixed system where there is an aristocratic Senate that is composed of like the richest landowners who then also go on to be magistrates of the city and later of the empire. There are the magistrates themselves who are elected by popular assemblies, and then those popular assemblies. So it's kind of like the three basic components are popular assemblies, aristocratic Senate, and executive magistrates. And then they set up their whole system to be yearly terms, right? You're supposed to come into office, you hold office for 1 year, and then you go away and relinquish power to somebody else. And then along the way, the Romans were very big into like dual power sharing, where there was always going to be two or more of any given office so that no one person would have all the power. And this worked for like 500 years. And it's one of the more sort of incredible things, I think, is, we get down to the era of Marius and Sulla and Caesar, and you're like, oh, yeah, well, of course, if Caesar is given absolute power, he's never going to give it up. But for 500 years, Romans had been getting absolute power and giving it up. And even if you don't count the consulships, there had been many, many dictators who had been elected over the years, which were that was supposed to be just in like an emergency, 6-month grant of absolute power. But then every Roman gave it up. So that's all a long way of saying that they set up a sort of a mixed, balanced republican system to basically ward off monarchy at all cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk about the Gracchi, we can talk about Marius and Sulla, we can talk about like 2 generations back from Julius Caesar, right? But it goes back further than that, wouldn't you say? I mean, were there times earlier than those times where you start to see this republic breaking down, or you start to see the seeds of its own demise? Like, if there are any places in history we could pinpoint as the start of the fall and the unraveling, where would it be?
Well, I start the book at the end of the Third Punic War, which is kind of where I place the Republic is really it begins its course over the next century towards like Octavian and the founding of an actual like autocratic government. But before that, I mean, before the Third Punic War, there's hundreds of years where there's internal conflicts. There's the conflict of the orders, and a lot of this is like, it's more drawn out in sort of contradictory contrast in the literature between like patricians and plebs. And like, we know that it was way more sort of mixed up than this. It wasn't the case that like no pleb had ever risen before, various strikes went on. But so there had always been domestic conflict where actually along the way, the Senate and the magistrates kind of had to cede more power and more rights to the plebs and to the popular assemblies. The crucible of the Punic Wars really sort of scrambles up Roman society in a major way, because a ton of the old patrician families, they had been, all their young men were officers in the Punic Wars. And so as Hannibal is defeating them and killing 50,000 here and 50,000 there, that's like the cream of the Republican aristocracy. And so they all get mostly wiped out during the Punic Wars, and you have like a new generation that comes in. Then they move over into Greece and they start picking up more and more sort of Greek ideas and Greek literature and Greek culture. And then once they emerge fully dominant over the Mediterranean, or at least the Western Mediterranean, the wealth that is being accrued over the course of all these conquests of Spain, of North Africa, and of Greece is all being held in the hands of the senators, right? It is the leaders, the consuls who are off leading these campaigns are the ones who are then in charge of how the wealth is distributed amongst the Romans. And we're talking about slaves, we're talking about literal gold, literal silver, coins, jewels, like all of this stuff is being held and distributed by the senatorial aristocracy. At the same time that the small freeholders, who had been like the backbone of the legions for hundreds of years, where you actually needed to have a minimum property requirement in order to serve in the legions, these guys are now being dragged off to fight in Spain or in Greece for years at a time. Their little small farms fall into disrepair. There are now newly super enriched senatorial landowners who were like, yeah, I want to buy up that piece of property. Yeah, I'll give you money for that little plot of land, which the smallholders eventually are having to sell out one by one. And then they are also, the senatorial aristocracy is using all of this wealth to buy slaves and enslave hundreds of thousands of people and then bring them over into Italy and into Sicily and deposit them. And so you have this sort of like the free population of Rome that had been kind of the foundation upon which the Republic was built was really just disappearing. And the small freeholder citizen is going out the window. And what we are left with is an increasingly super rich elite and an increasingly poor and impoverished and dispossessed lower classes. And then they don't really have another great power to bind them together the way that they had stayed bound together during the Punic Wars. And so after about 150 BC, politics starts to take on ever increasingly violent overtones as the Romans turned on each other to eventually have one guy, emerge victorious as the dictator of Rome.
I don't hear anything that has to do with today. Do you, Jen?
No, I was going to say, do we think that like this change of having sort of freeholders and smaller farms being able to produce maybe on a smaller scale, but like in a more equitable, maybe well-paid manner, as opposed to sort of the importation of chattel slavery and mass production?
This is the latifundias, Jen. This is the rise of the latifundia.
I know exactly what it is. Yep. The latifundia chattel slavery that then changed and destroyed an economy that had existed before. Do we see any parallels at all to maybe what's going on with automation and AI and the disappearance of jobs that used to exist?
Of course not. No, that's not a thing.
And a small amount of wealth is being concentrated into 3 or 4 hands at the top, and everyone else is being expected to fight each other on the White House lawn. No. Sorry.
Yeah, and then the thing about, and this is something that is true, like just not even in the ancient world, but like all the work that I've done in revolutions. Like this is sort of like a recurring theme leading into great revolutionary like social upheavals. What goes on, especially here in the Roman case, is it leaves the door open for individuals to come along like Caesar, like Marius, and promise to start doing something about these like social dislocations. Like you used to have a way to support you and your family, and now you don't. They were constantly trying to figure out a way to rebuild the class of smallholders as they give land to veterans. Usually Marius is trying to do this, Sulla is trying to do this. But of course, then what happened is like you give a soldier like a deed to 10 acres in some random swampland. And then there's a speculator who's coming along being like, dude, I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar for that if you just hand me the deed. And they'll be like, yeah, sure. I just want to go to the brothel, frankly. And
I don't know how to farm. Like, I don't know how to live a life of peace. I have no training,
Yeah, I'm not a farmer. And because the sort of the stewards of the Republic, let's say the Senate, really failed to address what was going on economically and socially, and sort of give any kind of, like when the Gracchi show up and start trying to do land reform in order to like literally address the situation that had just happened, specifically because of ongoing wars in Spain, right? This was all very context-based, where they had been a miserable war in Spain that people were being hauled off to fight in for years. There was not much booty left. There was no pillaging left to be done, right? They had already kind of taken everything. Scipio Aemilianus's triumph after defeating some Spanish groups was famously sort of paltry, and the soldiers didn't get as much as they used to get, and they were like, this is all lame. And so the Gracchi come in and are trying to like redistribute land and take publicly owned land and give it to some of these dispossessed farmers. And the Senate just fights them tooth and nail. They just drag their feet. They get in the way. They ultimately wind up clubbing both of them to death to stop any kind of reforms. And in stopping the reforms, that is what's going to build the tension that people like Marius, Sulla, and then later Caesar can tap into. And if the Senate had had any kind of like even inkling of enlightened self-interest, they would have realized what was brewing under their feet and how much that could be used against them to destroy the very institution that they think they're protecting by denying people their right to land and right to actual live like dignified lives.
Jen, what would you define as romantic?
Are we talking like flowers and chocolate and candy and all that like real world bullshit, or the stuff I like to read about?
I'm talking about getting yourself kidnapped by your father's sworn enemy because the banquet needed livening up.
Are we talking about having your enemy / crush throw axes at your head for both kingship and pleasure?
That's like my type of competency porn. How about getting high in a weed sauna amid epic confusion about whether or not you're married to your sworn enemy? I love this so much.
Yeah, and how about a sweeping epic historical novel set during the fall of Rome, featuring Alaric of the Visigoths, a barbarian warlord, and a wayward imperial princess who just wants to take control of her own destiny. How does that sound, Jenny?
It sounds like my book, Enemy of My Dreams, which is available right now in hardback, ebook, and audio download wherever books are sold.
Pick up a copy. We promise it's one adventure you'll never want to escape.
Your vehicle doesn't just get you from here to there. It's a bridge to the people and places that matter most. It's how you show up for your family, your community, and everyone else that depends on you. That's why for 125 years, Firestone has been building tires with one thing in mind: to deliver products that are as reliable as you are. Firestone, always dependable since 1900.
Half Man, the new HBO original limited series from Baby Reindeer creator Richard Gadd, examines the tumultuous relationship between two estranged brothers, tracking the highs and lows of the pair over the course of 40 years. Starring Emmy Award winner Richard Gadd and BAFTA Award winner Jamie Bell. Half Man premieres April 23rd on HBO Max.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they start. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents on average 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
So before we get too far into it, let's back up a little bit and sort of frame the Gracchi brothers. What time period are we talking about here? And who were these guys?
We're like in the 130s, 120s BCE.
Relatively soon after the Third Punic War, right?
Yeah. And so Tiberius Gracchus, for example, he was the older brother. You know, he was there at Carthage when they finally besieged the city and finally took it and salted the earth.
That is the first episode we ever did on the podcast. It's called Street Cleaners of Carthage. It's all about the Third Punic War, and it is brutal. Yeah.
Speaking of just making up wars and then going and waging them, which also has nothing relevant to say about to things that are happening today. Yeah, just hauling off and deciding to declare war on somebody. Why? Because they paid us back too early?
Nothing to do with now.
Nothing. I have no idea where you get that from.
That's a great. They successfully met their treaty obligations earlier than you thought, so now we have to go burn your city to the ground. Amazing stuff. I love the Romans. Okay, so the Gracchi. Like, just forget everything you think you know about the Gracchi. Gaius and Tiberius are two sons of one of the innermost noble families in Rome. Like, their father, he was twice consul. He'd been awarded triumphs. Like, he was honestly like one of the biggest deal sort of leaders and politicians of the mid 2nd century BCE. And he marries Cornelia is from the Scipio family, and they are absolute royalty by this point because Scipio had won the Punic War a generation earlier. And so they are the scions of one of the great noble families in Rome. They're not plebs. They're not coming up from the people. They're not populist rabble rousers in the sense of like that's really what they're trying to do, nor are they looking at serving as a tribune of the plebs as the thing that they're going to do. How do I want to say this? The being tribune of the plebs is the very first step in their career. It's not the last step in their career. Running for and becoming tribune of the plebs is like an entry point magistracy for somebody who is then going to go on and be a praetor and a consul later on down the line. Both Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus were on a trajectory to become consuls of Rome, a couple decades in the future after they were done with some of these early offices. They were linked to a small group of reform-minded senators who were interested in, like we were just talking about, solving this problem of the disappearance of the small holding citizen farmer. And in that sense, they do have this sort of like enlightened self-interest about what the Republic is meant to be and like how Roman society is supposed to function. But also, of course, if your little senatorial political faction is the one who gives out all of this land to all of these, landless citizens, all those people become your political clients like instantly. And you can bring them in. And this is the way Roman politics works. It was a very client patron-based system. And so if you were an ambitious politician and you wanted to run for office and you wanted to win, you needed to have your clients come down and vote for you. If the Gracchi and this little Claudian circle that they were a part of was the one giving out all of this land, then they would become the most powerful political faction in Rome, which is also part of why all of this does not work, because the senators who were opposing this land reform opposed it for ideological reasons, sure, but also because they were so wrapped up in trying to deny one of their own rivals more political power, they wind up just like setting the stage for the entire system to break down because they were so obsessed with not wanting in this moment and in this context for my political rival to get any kind of win, which is also something that I have seen repeatedly over my own lifetime here in the United States of America in the late 20th and early 21st century. As things come along, and it's like, it doesn't even matter whether it's good or it's bad. It's just like, oh, the other party is putting this forward, so we have to destroy it. We can't let the other side get a political victory. Yeah, and so the Gracchi are going to come in the 130s and then in the 120s and attempt to reform the system, and they are going to be brutally beaten back.
It's chilling to me listening to this that there are so many parallels. And I want to be careful throughout this series not to just automatically reduce everything to like, well, ancient Rome, they were just like us, they're doing the exact same things. Because it wasn't always exactly the same thing. But at the same time, I can't help but hear our housing affordability crisis in this, and our big VC companies buying up homes in this, and our politicians wanting to own the libs and so completely dismantling our entire ability as a government to regulate climate change just because the libs would hate it in this, like everything. I get chills listening to this.
Or healthcare. I think healthcare is a massive one too.
Immigration, like Donald Trump tried to basically did during the Biden era, shut down a bipartisan solution on immigration because he wanted the Republicans to have that as a cudgel with which to beat the Democrats.
All this is true. And then I was pitching and writing this book back in like 2012, 2013. Everything that I wrote about was like, okay, there's some parallels that I see here, but mostly I just want to like talk about this undercovered period because like the storm before the storm And like to echo what you said is like, it's not let's compare ancient Rome to America today. Like it's nothing that facile. It's just a straight 50-year period, 50-year history of a period that I find particularly fascinating. But also, yeah, like when I was going through it, I was like, crap, that sounds familiar. Crap, that sounds familiar. And then I wanted to, write a book that was maybe a little prescient, that would help us deal with things that maybe hadn't quite come along yet, but would down the line. And then like, as I was writing it, it came out in early 2017. So I was writing it in 2015, 2016. This is right when Trump is getting going. And I'm just like, Christ, this is happening way faster than I thought it was going to.
I know for me, because I was living abroad during the first Trump presidency and some of Biden actually, and being here for this presidency feels very different. It is hard not to see those comparisons. And I read your book when it originally came out because I used it for a little context for me for the arc we did on Spartacus, even though they're not exactly connected, but like it's all leading into the same kind of thing. Yeah, it's really hard not to see what was coming.
Let's get into the Marius and Sulla situation. Who was Marius and how did his military reforms pave the way for Caesar's rise to power?
All right. So Gaius Marius was what's known as a novus homo, a new man. He was coming from a family. He did not have consular ancestors. He was not from a senatorial family. He was from one of the like Italian towns that was under like Roman hegemony, because this is even before the social war.
How many generations after the Gracchi? This is like after the Gracchi, but not by a lot, right?
Marius, it's like one.
That's what I thought. Yeah, he's like the next generation down.
Yeah, because like Tiberius Gracchus serves his tribunate in the early 130s, and then Gaius is in the 120s, and then Marius's run of consulships is like 105 or 106 down to like 100 BCE. Don't quote me on those exact dates. I don't have them right in front of me. But Marius is ambitious, and Marius wants to be consul of Rome. And so he does what you do, which is serve in a series of offices that then take you up and up and up. And he's closely connected to a very powerful senatorial family called the Metelli. They had sort of taken over as the dominant noble family in Rome. There were like 4 sons of one of these families, and they had cousins who were all men. And so they just like, if you go through the roles of this period, the Metelli are pumping out consuls like crazy. And Marius is hooked into them. Rome then starts to face this problem of a rebellious king in North Africa, this guy Jugurtha, who was sort of flouting Roman authority, right? He was an allied client king of Rome. He had served with the legions in Spain. Like he was semi-Romanized, but also looking to like expand his own power vis-a-vis, where the Romans were sitting and things. So he's bribing the Senate constantly to like have them approve various things that he is doing. But then it gets to be so intolerable that the Romans have to send in armies. He's become so provocative. And the legions can't do anything about it. They can't stop him. They can't fight him. And there's suspicion that Jugurtha is bribing those generals to not actually fight him that hard. And Marius promises to go down there and win the war. And actually, and to do this, like unseats his patron in order to go do this. Like Marius is he's a very ambitious man. And in winning this war against Jugurtha, Marius skyrockets to the top of the sort of political ladder. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody's like, you're great. This is fantastic. Then a whole tribe of Cimbri, is it the Cimbri? Yeah, it's the Cimbri, who are starting to migrate, and they also annihilate some legions, and we have to send Marius up there to deal with them.
Yeah, because now he's the guy who does that.
Yeah, now Marius is the guy that you send to deal with the people who destroy our legions. And this gets to sort of like the second half of what you were getting at, which is by now getting enough guys to serve in the legions is a tough thing to do, because there had been property requirements in order to serve in the legions. And with the dispossession of the small citizen farmers, the recruitment pool for the legions was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And Marius is like, well, I'm going to go do this and we are going to win these wars. We need to drop the property requirement. You need to let me just recruit anybody who is willing to serve. And the Senate says, okay, again, because of the context, because of the specific historical circumstances that they were in. Marius raises these legions. He goes off. He defeats the Cimbri. It takes him a little while. And so they keep repeating him as consul, which is something that you are never supposed to do. You're not supposed to repeat as consul, but Marius does. And This creates the basic model of a Roman politician who is the leader of an army that is drawn from the poor and dispossessed part of the population, who are now personally loyal to Marius rather than any sort of like abstract loyalty to the Senate and the people of Rome. This is the model that then Sulla will follow, and Pompey will follow, and Crassus and Caesar and Octavian, all the way down the line. So Marius, and the thing is like, what else was Marius going to do? I don't think this is like a bad idea. I don't think this is like anything that like if I was in Rome at the time, I would be like, yeah, we got to drop the property requirements. We do not have enough soldiers for the legions and we got to do stuff. But it does get the ball rolling on, like 100 years of civil war.
Well, that's the thing about the military, is it was a path to financial stability. Like, it was one of the few places in the ancient world where you got theoretically a regular salary plus, an opportunity for bonuses if you sack a city. And most of the time, I mean, things changed, but like, you were supposed to get land when you were out, right? Like, as part of your retirement settlement. So this was like a path to getting your land.
Also, it sort of solves that problem, right? Like, you had all these people who were small freeholders who now have no more work, but also no way to earn money. And if you can beef up your army with maybe some incentives and cash that'll keep going back to their family, like, new industry made.
If you had been dispossessed, yeah, you're now going to get a regular paycheck. And if you manage to live through your hitch, yeah, they'll give you land. And now you're set again until it comes time to sell it to the speculating rich senator next year, when you realize you don't actually want to sit around and grow beets.
Right, like that land is off in the wilds of Germania and you have to subdue the population. There's already a guy there and you have to like fight him off.
And not to be too modern, but this is a problem we have now, right? A lot of industry that has disappeared in certain places. I live in a state at the moment that is the most friendly to vets, to former service people. That is a massive way in which their family and they are able to make money and support themselves.
Like grants for college. It's a leg up for a lot of people, yeah.
Absolutely. It's a massive leg up, and it's sometimes the only leg out of bad situations. So it is something we have carried forward, and the problem is we have never successfully dealt with what happens post-service, how we care for those people. That's been really gutted, and what jobs and industry looks like after.
Poor treatment of veterans is one of the oldest stories that we have. You get done fighting and suddenly the people who led you just don't give a shit anymore about you. And that is a real constant throughout all of history. And with the armies, if you skip ahead 100 years and we just blow through the collapse of democracy in Rome, which is the topic of this very episode. The problem with what Marius was doing, or what in time became the problem, is not so much that being a soldier could now be considered a stable profession that you would do. You would have like a career in the army. It was the personalist loyalty of it all. And the fact that your sort of economic fortunes as a common soldier were tied to whether or not Marius won a battle or whether Sulla won a battle. And, if your guy lost, then you yourself, you don't get any donatives. You don't get slaves. You don't get, your allotment of the spoils of war. And so when Marius and Sulla are not fighting Cimbri and Jugurtha and, Mithridates, and they start fighting each other, they're just as willing to destroy each other as they are these foreign enemies. Because again, if Marius loses a civil war, if Sulla loses a civil war, then we're all screwed. And over the course of time, Sulla and Marius are both incredibly charismatic figures, their soldiers want to support them. That's the real issue, more than the transformation of the legions from, this kind of like citizen militia, this glorified citizen militia that had been in the beginning, into the professional soldiering of the empire. Because once Augustus sort of figures out how to stably mint coins and deliver them on time with regularity, then, the legions kind of stop being an engine of civil war, at least for like a little while.
No, the Praetorian Guard becomes an engine of civil war.
Then the Praetorian Guard steps into the mix.
They've entered the chat.
The Praetorian Guard would like to introduce itself.
But that has to do with being, again, as we said in this situation, loyalty to one person, right? Like, it's this idea of, if you have an army, like a state army, but also is intensely loyal to one person, what happens when that person is on the losing end of internal conflict amongst other, internal powers. Who do you side with?
And you absolutely see Julius Caesar leading his army across the Rubicon in that. I mean, that's why they were willing to cross that boundary, There was a generational precedent for that. You can also see, not to drag us back to the present and everything, but the creation of ICE and the way that the recruitment of that is explicitly and implicitly white nationalist, so that these are people who side with Trump and Trump's agenda. Plus, they have the budget of entire countries' militaries at this point. Like this is absolutely happening here.
Yeah, in that sense, yeah. What ICE is sort of resembles. There were like these intermediate phases where you have like full armies and legions. They were always referred to as like swordsmen on retainer. Like often veterans or people that had served in the legions at some point would then be on the payroll of one of these senatorial grandees who become warlords and dynasts. That you had your guys like on retainer and were able to fight street battles and stuff. And ICE very much is becoming a personalist army of Donald Trump. You join ICE at this point because you are loyal to Donald Trump and because you believe in his ideological project of, purging Latinos from America, purging everybody but white people from America.
It's starting with just brown people. It will be everyone who doesn't agree with the message.
Yeah, and we've already had them kill citizens for no reason, and we're just sort of continuing on as a society as if this isn't like a thing that is happening.
Let's talk about the social war. Where were we going with that?
Where we're going with that is that one of the biggest sort of like domestic political issues that is facing Rome as they're sort of grappling with these rising economic inequality and the personalist turn in politics is that at this moment, Rome and the Republic is still just this like little area around Latium, right? It's kind of the original core area of the Romans. When they went out a-conquering through Italy, they were not absorbing, annexing, and then directly administering these other Italian cities that were in Etruria or like up north or down in the Greek areas in the south. They were coming in and saying, okay, what you guys are now allies of Rome. That's going to be your status. And for the most part, we don't really have a heavy tax burden that we plan on laying upon you. And we really don't want to send Romans to like administer your city directly. We plan on leaving that to your own local elites. You guys do whatever you've always done. The one thing we really require of you is soldiers to fight in our armies. And that is what we want from you. And for a couple hundred years, this was like a pretty, I think, decent deal for the Italians. Because they weren't being governed by Rome. Rome was not acting as a sort of a tyrannical hegemon over Italy. But in the due course of time, they are also sucked up in these giant wars. They were probably serving, like back of the envelope math. They probably composed 2/3 of the Roman armies. When we talk about the legions, probably 2/3 of those soldiers who were a part of the larger armies, not necessarily just the Roman legions. Probably made up about 2/3 of the fighting forces, and they were getting about 1/3 of the distribution of sort of the wealth and booty at the end of a campaign. So they were really finding themselves on the short end of a stick. They were contributing more and more and more to the health of the empire and the expansion of the empire, and were getting less and less for it. And so we start seeing at the end of the 2nd century, and really the Gracchi are one of the very first people to bring this up. And it is the notion of Italian citizenship, that this has gone on long enough that Italy as a peninsula has been under Roman hegemony for so long. They are such an integrated part of the system that we should just make the Italians full citizens of Rome instead of doing this like they're allies or they have certain Latin rights, but they're not actually technically Roman. And this sets off like a very long conflict where every so often, like every generation or so, you'll get some leaders who are like, hey, what about the Italians? Maybe we should make the Italians citizens. And then, conservative Roman senators usually being like, no, we don't want to do that because for every Italian that comes in, now my vote and my influence is being diluted just that much. And if you're bringing in all the Italians, then suddenly us, the Romans, the true forebearers of the Republic, are going to get drowned out by all of these Italians. So Marius comes into this, and he is saying things like, in the dust and din of battle, who can tell Roman from Italian? And Marius was a big supporter of the concept of Italian citizenship, which again, though, just to put a pin on that for a sec and go back to what I said earlier about the Gracchi, one of the sources of conflict over whether or not to give the Italian citizenship is the person or the leader who pushes that through now gets all those Italians as their political clients. And so this is also about factionalism amongst the Roman aristocracy, where nobody wants one of their rivals to be the one to push through Italian citizenship, because now that guy is going to be the most powerful person in the Republic, and I am not, and that is intolerable. So let's jam this up and never give citizenship to the Italians. And this just builds and builds and builds and builds, and it feeds into the conflict between Marius and Sulla, and then explodes into a thing that we call the Social War, which is called the Social War because they were the socii, they were the allies of Rome. And it is that conflict which ends, I gotta say, with the Italians winning. The Italians win the Social War outright. They get citizenship at the end of the Social War. And then what happens? Like, the Romans had been freaking out. They were like, oh no, what's going to happen if the Italians get citizenship? What happens if we get drowned out? Oh my God, everything is going to fall apart. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And we are simply setting up 2-3 centuries of what we consider to be like the high golden age of classical civilization. Like, I don't think that citizenship for the Italians did anything but strengthen their civilization. And yeah, it falls into an autocracy and the Republic does collapse. But the Italians didn't do that. Julius Caesar traces his roots back to frickin' Venus coming down, I guess, and having sex with somebody on the Capitoline Hill. The Italians didn't fucking wreck the Republic, man. The fucking Romans did.
None of that is propaganda at all.
Good sleep is everything. That's why Ollie's Science Bag Support is made with a blend of melatonin and L-theanine for both kiddos and grown-ups. So when your mind won't switch off, you've got something that can help. Your racing thoughts and restless nights won't stand a chance. Find Ollie Sleep Solutions for the whole family at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
So who is Sulla at this point? And my theory about Sulla is that he gave the next generation, Pompey, Julius Caesar, Cicero, Sulla-inflicted PTSD, which you can really see in how they function. But who was this guy, and what did he do that was so terrible?
Okay, Sulla is, unlike Marius, he is the descendant of a noble family. So he's, that's where he's coming from. He's not a new man at all. But his dad had basically bankrupted the family. And so when Sulla comes of age and it's time for him to go embark on his career, which, you need to be self-funded. This is one of the reasons the nobles have the high offices and serve in the cavalry and stuff, because they can actually afford horses. Sulla's going to go launch his career, and then the guy, they're like, you don't have any money, man. Like, you're stony broke. Your dad spent it all. Like, all that's left in this estate is like debts. So Sulla has to sit on the sidelines for like a while. And when I make my TV show about Marius and Sulla, the years of Sulla, like living with like actors and poets, and he's sort of bouncing from widow's bed to widow's bed in order to keep himself like in money. He's got this dude Metrobius who's with him like forever. Metrobius is there at the very end, who's like effectively Sulla's longest term gay partner. Like, Sulla has like 5 wives, but there's only one Metrobius. They get together. They just murder a bunch of people together. It's really heartwarming. We find Metrobius at the beginning, and he's there at the end. And so, but Sulla is ambitious, and he finally manages to get into the legions during the war with Jugurtha. And he's younger than Marius. And so as Marius is becoming consul and going over there and leading the armies, Sulla is just entering his career, and he becomes attached as a more junior officer to Marius's legions. This is all great. So Marius and Sulla are in Africa together, and they're fighting together. And then Sulla becomes the officer who successfully captures Jugurtha. He's the one who Marius sends out when they trick Jugurtha and they trap him. Sulla is the one who actually spearheads that. When the Romans then come back triumphant from Africa, sort of Roman honor dictates that whatever good happens under a consul's command is sort of for the consul to celebrate for himself. So Marius leads these legions. They capture Jugurtha. It is Marius's right to say, I'm the one who captured Jugurtha. That was me. I did it. Except when Sulla comes back, there's a lot of people who don't like Marius, and they're telling Sulla, hey, you're actually the one who did it. Why don't you go ahead and take credit for it publicly and say, I'm the one who did it. And so Sulla starts doing this. This creates a rift with Marius because he's taking credit for things that he probably should not have been taking credit for. But then Sulla goes off and he's fighting with the Cimbri. He's fighting against the Cimbri, in Gaul. And he is becoming more and more popular. So as Marius is sort of sitting at the very pinnacle of his powers, he's serving consecutive consulships right at the turn of the millennia. Sulla is himself coming up right in his wake. And it's going to be pretty soon Sulla's time. And he can finally get out from under Marius's shadow. This will all come to a head when there seems to be a giant threat facing the empire from the east, and this is Mithridates. This is King Mithridates, who had this empire that he had cobbled together based out of the Black Sea. He enrolls hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and his plan is to retake Greece from the Romans. The Romans had only been they'd been in Greece for 150 years. It's not like they'd been there forever. And so Mithridates is going to retake Greece from the Romans. The Romans can't let this happen, so they have to send a ton of legions east. And the question is, who is going to lead these forces? This is going to be an insanely lucrative campaign. Insanely lucrative campaign. You're going into Greece. You're going against Mithridates. Of course, we can kick his ass. We are going to come back with so many slaves and so much gold and so much silver. People are excited to sign up. People want to go. Sulla is setting aside his legions. They're preparing to go. And then Marius decides, you know what? I actually think I should be the one to lead this army. And even though I am now an old man, and even though my time has passed, and even though I've been consul 6 times, and this will be Sulla's first time as consul, this by all rights should be Sulla's command. Marius arranges things to deprive Sulla of that command and strip him of the command and award it instead to Marius, which is what leads to Sulla saying to himself, either I can take this, right, that Marius has induced tribunes of the plebs to strip me of the command and give it to Marius. I can either accept that, or I can fight for my command and I can fight for the power and authority that I think I am owed. And the only way to do that is to march my army on the city of Rome itself. That is the first time that Roman legions march on Rome. This is before Caesar. This is where Caesar gets it from. And Sulla is going to do this twice. And it is all of this that sort of sets in motion the final civil wars of my book, which is, yes, then Sulla goes east with his legions. He's going to defeat Mithridates. Meanwhile, back in Italy, Marius is rounding up all of Sulla's enemies and all of his supporters, and he's building a giant army in Italy that is going to prevent Sulla from ever coming back and ever basking in the glory of what he did in the East. And that leads to a major civil war that ends with Sulla victorious and Marius dropping dead in a tent before they ever get to fight, which is annoying. And sometimes I really toy with the notion when I make my TV show about Marius and Sulla of just saying screw it and having Marius live. They go fight each other.
Yeah, I kind of did that in Enemy of My Dreams. I made up a bunch of stuff. Sometimes you have to go the alternate history route.
Sulla casts himself as the defender of the old Republican order and the old senatorial order. And he is going to be fighting on behalf of the old patricians, the old ways, the old traditions, whereas Marius is the new man who has broken precedent by serving multiple consulships in a row. And I don't think we fully said what an enormous deal that was. You were supposed to serve as consul for 1 year. Then you were supposed to give up your consulship. And then if you were going to serve a second consulship in your life, it was going to be like 20 years later. And there were long periods of Roman history where it was literally like statutorily, I don't think you could serve a consulship more than 15 years before your last one. And so for Marius to be elected consul and then reelected consul and then reelected consul and reelected consul is like an insane thing. And there were lots of old traditional senatorial Republicans who were like not happy with any of this. And then the final little bit of this is that Marius was very pro-Italian. And so Marius is going to have the support of the larger Italian peninsula, whereas Sulla is kind of sticking with the idea that, like, we can't let the Italians in. We don't want to give the Italians citizenship. Those are the ideological conflicts that are driving them. And I really think, like, my basic theory, I think I'm right about this, is that Sulla wins the civil war when he comes back from the east, and Marius's forces, they're under different guys now because Marius is dead, but the Marian forces are all lined up to fight Sulla. But then Sulla lands in Italy, and at every place he goes, you know what? Actually, citizenship for the Italians. We're actually going to do that. I'm going to give you guys citizenship. That's not going to be an issue anymore. We're just going to go ahead and do it. And that just collapses opposition to Sulla, because in Italy, what those guys were fighting for was a continuation of the social war, which is we want citizenship. And as soon as Sulla says, I'll give you citizenship, and the Marians are already saying we'll give you citizenship, well, then hell, we won. Like, why would we fight anymore? And so this is what allows Sulla to win the civil war, is by giving the Italians the victory that they need. And then the Italians become Roman citizens. And that is when Sulla decides it is time to take care of my enemies.
Let's talk about the purging.
The nature of these purges, there had been violent domestic conflict in Roman history. Like, we know this, the stuff about the conflict of the orders. There were street gangs that were fighting each other. When the Gracchi show up, this is when you start getting armed people fighting each other and settling political disputes by literally murdering your opponent. I'm not usually a Sulla stan and not usually a Sulla apologist, but I will say that Marius was way out of line, like way out of line.
Are you saying maybe sometimes people should take a step back and let another generation lead?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like that command for Mithridates was absolutely Sulla's, right? Like, there's no reason why Marius should have had that command, and every reason why Sulla should have had it.
But if it's Sulla, though, just to devil's advocate this a tad, if the person stepping up to lead is Sulla, question mark.
But is the question mark because of the position he was backed into?
I feel like Sulla, to me, what stands out about him is that he is the first Roman that I'm aware of that inflicted his own army on his own people. And he's also, there's this whole thing with him and dictatorships. Like, he declared himself dictator for a while, but he also gave it up at a certain point, right?
Yeah, except the horrors he did, but you know.
And there's the purging, of course.
But he did have that one long-term boyfriend, you know.
Sulla hadn't done anything yet. That's the thing. Sulla had offended Marius, and he had done some other things that annoyed people. And then like him getting the command, like, was that ballot rigged? Like, probably. But how old are Roman consuls? Roman consuls, you got to be 42 years old to be consul, and it's a really big deal to be consul in your year, which is the first time you're eligible to be consul, you win consul. So these guys, Roman leaders, are in their 40s, right? That's sort of the prime of a Roman leader's life. These are the people we want leading our armies. These are the people we want representing us. Marius, he's like in his 60s at this point. And Plutarch has a whole section in Marius's biography where Marius is like coming down to the Campus Martius to like do push-ups and jumping jacks to like show the people that he's like still fit and can do it. And they're like, what are you doing, old man? Like, you should be retired. Like, they called him the third founder of Rome, Marius. That's how important he was. And instead of just kicking it in his estates and enjoying that, he's like, no, everything has to be mine. Everything needs to be mine. And so he just takes and takes and takes and takes and takes. And then when Sulla comes back and does the Sullan purge, which we will get to here in a second, this is coming on the heels of When Sulla went east, Marius and all of his guys plunged into Rome, and he's got these dudes called the Spiked Boots, which are these, like, I think Germanic mercenaries. They purge Sulla's supporters. They are murdering people in the streets. They are killing people. They drive Sulla's family out of Rome. They are hacking off heads and showing them off. Sulla's purge is, yes, about cleaning house so that he can rule, but it's also vengeance. Like, it's revenge. Sulla did not invent the concept of violently purging his enemies. That was something that sort of Marius and his guys had done just a couple years earlier. Sulla's wife and children show up in Athens, where Sulla is besieging Athens at the time. His wife and kids show up, say, everybody you love has been murdered. All your estates have been seized by the Marians. Sulla, he's not going to do nothing when he comes back to Italy. And so he comes back to Italy, and the social war ends. The Italians have citizenship. Sulla induces the Senate to name him dictator, which is a position, an official position in the Roman constitution, which is meant to be a temporary grant of absolute power to get you through an emergency, and then it would last for about 6 months. And Sulla gets them to fill out that piece of paper, but leave the "what date does this end" line blank. They just leave it blank. So it's just like, it's in perpetuity. They don't say a granted power for a specific amount of time. It's just kind of like in perpetuity. And then people are like, well, what do you mean by that? And it's just like, we'll kill you if you ask too many questions. I'm like, okay, I'll stop asking questions. The first prescription list that Sulla posts that basically says these guys are, the names on this list are outlaws. They can be killed on sight, and I want you to kill them, and I want you to bring their heads to me. It was just a very small number of names. It was very much the leaders of the opposition. Like, Marius's name would have been on that list had Marius still been alive. But then over the course of the next few days and the next few weeks, more names just get added, and Sulla's not really doing much, it seems like, to oversee this. He's got probably some clerks and some secretaries and some advisors who are all like, oh, we can just add anybody to the list. Guys show up. Hey, I've had a beef with this dude for the last 20 years. He's a Marian. Yeah, that's the ticket. Yeah, he's a Marian. He opposes you, so let's put his name on the list. You put his name on the list, and then you get to kill him and take all his stuff. And there are very, there's stuff again, like in the literature, where there's a guy who says, he goes down to the forum. He's like, shit, my name is on the list. Done in for my Alban estate. Because we start to then move into, this has nothing to do with politics. It's just people who have properties that you might want to own. You're just killing those guys and taking their stuff. This is where Crassus comes from, right? Like, we know this. Crassus is one of the more junior officers at this point, who, along with who else was in there? Catiline was in there.
Pompey was in there. The teenage butcher.
There are guys that they're killing. They're not even adding their names to the list until after they've been killed.
Yeah, I mean, come on, gotta make sure you made that murder count.
It does devolve into a bit of an eat the rich situation, but it might be the rich eating the rich.
No, the Sullan purges got a little out of hand.
They got a tad bit out of hand. We needed to rein this back.
Well, I think what you have directly after the Sullan purges is Spartacus's revolt, and I feel like if you didn't have Spartacus's revolt to play devil's advocate, would you still have a democracy? Because when that revolt happened, you now have an increased fear of people who've been brought to Rome who are not Romans, who are enslaved, who are uprising. And it was something that you could use to scare the common folk and keep them in line.
And that's Crassus, and that's what Crassus goes out and do.
This episode is brought to you by Ferrero. Soccer's biggest stage is approaching, and Ferrero is making it easy to go all in. Pick any two Ferrero brands from Kinder Bueno to Ferrero Rocher, and you could win the $1 million grand prize, plus an exciting range of daily and weekly prizes. Don't miss your shot. Official rules apply. Learn more at goallinandwin.com.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You know those friends who support your preference for podcasts over music on road trips? That's the energy State Farm brings to insurance. With over 19,000 local agents, they help you find the coverage that fits your needs, so you can spend less time worrying about insurance and more time enjoying the ride. Download the State Farm app or go online at statefarm.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
You tell yourself no one wants your college-era band tees, but on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
In your book, The Storm Before the Storm, you say that you were frequently asked the question, is America Rome? And if so, where are we in the Roman timeline? I'm going to quote you to yourself.
Okay, great.
Your answer to that question was, quote, despite what some hysterical commentators may claim, the Republic has not collapsed and been taken over by a dictator. That hasn't happened yet. This means that if the United States is anywhere on the Roman time, it must be somewhere between the Great Wars of Conquest and the rise of the Caesars. Those words were published in 2017. Do you still agree with them now?
We're not a dictatorship yet. We are fast moving in a direction that is, obviously, if you were going to tell the story of the American Republic becoming an American autocracy, where you still have the sort of the window dressing of the Republic, but it's actually an autocracy, it would be very easy to tell that story based off of everything that has happened in the last 10 years. And then fucking shit, it goes all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt, right? The imperial presidency growing and growing and growing and growing, and it's been growing, and that's been a theme of American history, with the Congress increasingly handing its power over to the executive branch and handing it over to the executive branch. We haven't declared a war since World War II, because we don't do that sort of thing anymore. We just leave it to the executive to do what they want. We've also now lost sort of institutional conflict that was meant to be the separation of powers was largely built off of the notion that there would be conflict between the Congress and the presidency and the Supreme Court. And that if you were powerful inside of Congress, you would, of course, jealously guard your powers from the executive, who might try to be gathering power for themselves. And so there was a belief among the founders that was, pretty true for a while, that Congress and the presidency and the Supreme Court would they would cohabitate antagonistically, that would make sure that no one of the branches had power. That's all gone out the window. And now we are an entirely party-based system where loyalty is not to institutions, loyalty is not to anything except the political party that you are a part of. And as long as Republicans are going to do nothing to stop Trump, then yes, we are in an increasingly dictatorial system. ICE is a problem. ICE has to be wiped out.
Absolutely.
Abolish ICE, please.
It's got to be. And it is, that didn't exist in his first term, right? Because what we do have now, the thing I was worried about before was a network of sheriffs, right? Sheriffs are low key some of the most reactionary fascist law enforcement officers in the country. And they have long been at odds with anything resembling liberalism or leftism. They've always been on board with this project. But this gigantic increase in ICE's budget and the recruitment into that, which is so very clearly personalist and so very clearly predicated on the idea that if you join ICE, you'll get to beat people and maybe even kill people and do cruel things to them. And you can vent your basest desires, these racist, violent fantasies that these guys have, that they now get to go out and enact in real life. They're so excited about the opportunity to go do this stuff that it is a threat to the Republic. It just is. So we are not at the point where I'm looking at Julius Caesar, right? Or even Marius and Sulla, because those guys did command literally gigantic armies. Basically, the premier fighting forces in the Mediterranean world were under the command of these personalist dictators, which we don't have that yet. The professional armed services is still the professional armed services. I retain skepticism that the formal armed forces would follow Trump necessarily. I think there's a notion that the military is inherently conservative and would inherently go along with Trump because he's conservative and represents what they want out of life. But this has never been true of the officer corps, and it's not nearly as clear-cut as we think about down in the rank and file. Most military people that I have known in my life have been loyal. And however much this is like straight indoctrination, which is like fine. Like if you want to indoctrinate our soldiers with a love of the Constitution, and that's what matters more than anything else, and not these sort of like serving under an autocratic warlord, then I think that the professional armed services are still neutral. At least neutral. Basically, like the economic fortunes of the soldiery and the officer corps is not tied to Trump's political success, which was very much the case during the late Republican era, where your own, like that very basic economic security that we all need, having enough to eat, having a place to live, all that stuff in Roman times, in the late Republic, was tied to the success or failure of your the rank and file of the army's paychecks are not necessarily dependent on Trump winning or losing. And even this, like, you know, going into Venezuela and creating a private slush fund out of their oil reserves, this is extremely like post-Third Punic War Roman acquisition of resources, where the consuls who go over there, the proconsuls who are fighting in Greece, right? Okay, now they've got control of all these mines. There's a buttload of mines up in Macedonia. These are not owned and controlled by the state per se. They're going to be owned and controlled by those individual politicians who are then going to control and disperse the wealth of that to their own political advantage. That's very similar. That is very similar. But like privates in the army are not getting a cut of that. Like it's the kind of thing Trump might actually do, because he has done stuff like this where he's done like these weird bonuses. But the bonuses that he is offering is not at the level of what the legionaries required, which is like, if we don't get these bonuses, we're going to starve to death. That's not true of the soldiery right now. It could be in time.
And I think that's part of the reason that you see so much funding going towards ICE, because I do think that one of the things that we have at the moment is the professional armed services are neutral. And part of the reason they are neutral is because their loyalty is to the Constitution and the other people they serve with. That doesn't mean that everyone is good in there and that I'm saying they're, what I'm saying is like that comes first. And in order to get rid of that indoctrination, I think I said that right, you have to really erode that over time because it's been built up over time. It won't happen overnight, which is what he's looking for. But starting your own branch will.
You know, with ICE and the way that the structure of the pay with ICE, they're supposed to get like this $50,000 bonus. And it turns out that they get that over 5 years. And if they quit, they have to give the money back. And so in a way, people employed by ICE, like, you know, the jackboots, are now very, very tied to the success of Donald Trump.
Sure. Yeah, ICE is a real problem. If the American Republic, I think, is going to survive this, there are several things that need to happen. One of them is that ICE really does have to just be completely dismantled. I mean, look, it was the INS. It was the INS until the Bush administration. We can totally dismantle the Department of Homeland Security if we wanted to. We can certainly peel off ICE, redirect its responsibilities to other agencies, and just completely clear out the rank and file and the leaders of this organization. It's explicitly, murderously anti-democratic, and just like it's like this vicious fighting force that is personally loyal to Trump. And then we're going to get a classic old school Roman dynastic struggle after Trump is dead. Right? Like who's going to wind up inheriting ICE? Like when Trump is gone, is it going to be JD Vance? Is it going to be Don Jr.? Is Ivanka going to make her play? Do we have Barone coming in and being like, I'm the Octavian figure here?
Right. I mean, that's kind of the scary thing in a way. It's like a little bit funny if you think of somebody like JD Vance trying to do it who just has absolutely no charisma at all and everyone seems to hate him, versus a figure that we might know less about, where it's like, I really don't know how this is going to go. It's a little terrifying to think about.
It is. Absolutely. I haven't been happy about the state or trajectory of American politics, I don't know, about 30 years now, 25 years.
I would also say that there's two things that are similar and also different that we don't focus enough on, which is the defunding and dismantling of the Department of Education. The reason I bring this up is because you see more and more people turning to things like ICE and the military as the way out of poverty, because we are defunding and eroding those educations and taking away those opportunities. Like, they're doing a lot of stuff, so we're not looking over there. And that is also how you wind up with people who are loyal to one party or one person or one dynasty.
One thing that I do think is worth pointing out here, because you were just talking about all that, is like, so Roman state capacity is like microscopic compared to what we understand as like what a modern state does or can do, like with an enormous bureaucracy and all of these different departments. And the reach and magnitude of what a modern state can do is just light years beyond anything that the Romans had going on. And so when we talk about like the Republic and the fall of the Republic and like the collapse of democracy and the rise of autocracy, we are talking about stuff that influences like a pretty small group of people in Italy who can make it to the assemblies, the senators who would prefer to have their sort of like ongoing oligarchy where they serve a year as consulship, which if you get back into like the origins of the Republic, like it is true that they were trying to avoid autocracy and kingship by making the consulship for just a year. It also ensured that every senatorial family got a chance to have one of their sons be a consul. Like everybody got a cookie in this model. And you weren't going to do any major things. And then also like you would leave and your rival would get the consulship. And one of the problems with one person serving for that amount of time is other people also want to be the most powerful person. And so one of the things that the Republican system did was kind of keep those elite ambitions in check because, you know, at least at the end of the day, we're all getting the same social chit that we want. Chit, C-H-I-T, not shit, S-H-I-T. So much so that like even after the empire begins, there are still consuls. They're still vying for consulships. They still want it. It's very much like a social thing as much as anything else. So the Republic falls into civil war. The disaster for like the provincials is the fact that these wars exist at all as they're being dragged into it. Maybe they're being dragged into fights. Armies are marching here and there and destroying things, like stuff's burning down. But if you're just like a Roman provincial in Spain or in Gaul or, you know, somewhere in Greece, like Republic, Empire, like, is there any difference for me at all?
I was just going to say, like, these are people who probably don't get to vote on things a lot anyway because they can't get all the way down to Rome, right?
No, they're not going to Rome. And with the Roman system of just kind of co-opting local systems, at least locally, most of those, at least the elites, like continued to have the same powers that they had before. This is really affecting kind of a small population inside of the empire. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that it's not a big deal, but it is worth pointing out like the reach of sort of Roman democracy or Roman republicanism was quite circumscribed geographically.
It's important to note that because of the outsized importance of this period in history to so many of us. And I do think in so many ways that so many of the dysfunctions of Roman democracy have been blown outward and now appropriated globally, including by other leading democracies such as ours. I mean, like the roots of slavery, imperialism, forms of xenophobia. And, you know, you can trace a lot of things back to that original sin. But at a certain point, certain things affected the entirety of the Mediterranean, but also a small population of people living in this one city.
Would you say that the mastery of propaganda is also what comes out of this as well? Like maybe that's where we get these people like Caesar and Octavian and even Mark Antony who become these masters of spinning that narrative so that what they're about to do or the society they want to set up feels more palatable because of the message that they have learned to spin after watching what happened with Sulla?
Well, I think the last point that I would make is that Sulla, like, this is now at the end of my book, where we've gone through the Gracchi getting beaten to death by, like, sort of semi-organized gangs. 50 years later, you have giant armies fighting each other for control of Rome. And Sulla finishes his purges, and he's still dictator. And then what he does is he drafts, essentially, a quote-unquote new constitution for Rome that recodifies the traditional forms of the Republic. Like the power that the Senate is supposed to have, the power that the assemblies are supposed to have, and magistrates are supposed to have. He's trying to reset it back to the way that it had been. And he imposes this using his dictatorial powers. And then, famously sets aside the dictatorship. He's like, okay, I came here. I think he was dictator for like 18 months. He was in perpetuity. But after 18 months, he's like, okay, I did what I came here to do. And then he retires. And then he, pretty much partied and drank himself to death. Is the end of Sulla. He dies of cirrhosis of the liver. His reform package was meant to restabilize the Republic and set it back to rights. Like, we can go back to the way that it had been before the Gracchi, and we're going to close this 50 years of chaos and civil war with what? A restored Republic. All that crap did not matter one bit to anybody who paid attention to Sulla's actual career. And the facts of Sulla's career are so much more important than the constitutional changes that he tried to impose in the end. Because as you said, like the PTSD theory, who's coming out of this? Crassus, Caesar. Caesar was almost killed in the Sullan purges. Caesar had to run away from being purged. 19-year-old Caesar's, bounding across rooftops. Every single one of those guys sees a person who is charismatic, wealthy, and powerful, commands armies, attains absolute power. That's the model now, that you can do that. Sulla did it. He broke all kinds of rules, every traditional form, all the mos maiorum and all the, you can't cross this line because it's magic and you can't have a sword on the other side of it. All that is out the window. And Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, Octavian, Antony, everybody is looking at Sulla's career and saying, that can be me. And I think that, in my own estimation, that's truly, there was no coming back from that. Once Sulla did what he did, there was no coming back. And eventually somebody, even if it wasn't Caesar, somebody like Caesar was going to do what Caesar had done. And I think also there is an element that it is coming, Roman leaders always wanted to take credit for things that they had done in their consulship. But because they were only consul for a year, it was just it was a very limited number of things that you could actually accomplish. And so what happens then is that the SPQR of it all, the Senate and people of Rome of it all, manages to hold itself together because its leadership is constantly renewing. Once you get into a position where individual leaders are lasting for more than just a year, the personalism of it and building up a unique personal following for yourself that is over, above, beyond, below the SPQR of it all is one of the things that Sulla bequeaths upon his heirs. And Caesar is a master propagandist. Of course he is. He's one of the best to ever do it, right? And if you want a tip, you want a propaganda tip. Caesar famously wrote the Gallic campaign stuff in common vernacular effectively.
That's why you translated it early in your Latin studies, because it's written so that anyone could translate it.
Yeah, the first thing Gaul is divided into 3 parts. And then eventually you get to Cicero and he doesn't fucking even know what a verb is.
No, thank you.
It's civil wars are bad, but Cicero got his head chopped off. So, is it really bad?
I've said this many times. Chickpea got his head cut off. His 13-year-old Jen was like, please make it stop.
Reasonable people can now disagree about whether or not the civil wars were good. But the other thing that Caesar did, which was really brilliant, was he occasionally admitted mistakes. And by occasionally admitting mistakes, it made everything that he was saying seem so truthful and believable. He's telling us things that he did wrong, right? That's great. And then he can just lie about other stuff because you totally believe him. So in propaganda terms, folks out there, if you admit to a couple of mistakes, then you're going to get a lot of latitude for the other stuff that you say to build yourself up. And then, you can just lie your head off. Go nuts.
Yeah. I also think Caesar did a lot of genocide. So the fact that maybe he admits a mistake or two is something. I don't know that it's a lot, but I do think that it is very interesting that the reason I think Caesar comes off the way he does throughout history, because we don't think first about the genocide, we think first about how he was murdered.
He distributed largesse. He was a generous Caesar's a real problematic fave.
Oh, God.
It stinks.
He truly is, He has such a wild life where you're just like, I want to.
Caesar committed genocide to further his political career. Just that's it. And then he started an entire civil war that engulfs the Mediterranean because it would be good for his political career, right? Like the big thing that Caesar was worried about is that he wouldn't be able to have a political career anymore. And so because of his fear of not being able to have a political career for himself, the entire Mediterranean has to go into fucking civil war. So that's not so good. But he was also very clearly, he had visionary qualities, unfortunately, that I do look at. I'm like, yeah, he was actually, there were problems with this society that needed to be resolved. And, you know, things like the calendar and things like, you know, like redirecting water from here to there. And like, he did attempt to accomplish some things that is actually, many of the things that Caesar winds up doing are stuff that Gaius Gracchus had proposed during his time in the tribunate. And one of the things, to go all the way back to the beginning of the book, is I was actually wound up being really impressed with Gaius Gracchus, which when I did the history of Rome, I kind of just like blew through that period. But in coming back to it, a lot of the things that Gaius Gracchus proposed in the 120s, had they been implemented, I think would have headed all of this off. And many of those things, Caesar then comes along like 100 years later, practically, and institutes those, or excuse me, not Caesar, but Octavian, as he becomes Augustus, does many of the things that Gaius Gracchus had proposed, and then it worked and stabilized their society. So one of the big takeaways is if you have problems in your society and there are pretty decent reform options in place to maybe correct some of this, don't not do it. Do it.
Almost like when FDR proposed the New Deal and created some sort of social safety net, it might have held us off from the position we are now until now.
Yeah. It certainly helped beat back what FDR did, headed off both like fascism and communism in the United States of America. And you can say that was good or you can say that was bad, but definitely worked.
Creating an actual social safety net, just like in the UK, post World War II, they created the NHS so that like you would be able to have medical care after everything that had happened and not, you know, go into medical debt. Like that was a good thing. Has it been derided over, you know, many, many years? Yes, but it still exists and that's a good thing. That's how we keep the fascists at bay.
We should do things like that.
We should really. It would be wonderful.
This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Mike, do you have anything that you would like to plug while we're here?
Well, this is one of the very first, like, I don't know when this is actually going to air. This is one of the first times that I've popped my head up publicly in like many, many months, because I ended the Martian Revolution part of the Revolutions podcast back in like May of last year. And since then, I have been diligently working on a book about the crisis of the 3rd century, which is due very soon. And when I turn in that manuscript and then take a little breather, I can come back and restart Revolutions, which I will, and do Revolutions for years and years and years to come. So right now you can find me at, you know, the Revolutions podcast or the History of Rome podcast. I have a couple of books. There's The Storm Before the Storm that we've talked about, and also Hero of Two Worlds, which is a biography of the Marquis de Lafayette in the American Revolution and the French Revolution. But other than that, many people will be like, "Oh, great, Mike is still alive. He's clearly doing podcast appearances, and he sounds okay. So he's not dead." But yes, I'm not totally back in the public eye yet, but I will be pretty soon.
Anywhere on social media or no?
Oh, honest to God, like not really at the moment. Twitter, okay. I took them all off my phone. And you can't even do stories on Instagram on the web browser. So it's like, what am I even doing? Blue Sky is Blue Sky. Like, I mean, I'm at Mike Duncan many places. Like, you can find me, but I'm very inactive on social media. I have, like many people, retreated to the Gen chat.
I understand this. Yeah, I mean,
group chats for life.
Yeah, hell yeah. Understood. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, we really appreciate you taking time out and visiting us and talking about this.
Totally. We shall do it again sometime, maybe next year when my book comes out.
Absolutely. I love to talk about goths.
Non-stop goth talk.
Non-stop goth talk, because in this era, the end of the, I don't know, let's mash it all together ahistorically and say we're at the end of the imperial regnum and we're all goths at this point.
I am Azrael Abyss.
I'm a goth, you're a goth. You got some Ostrogotha up in there.
Speaking of ramifications for mistreating immigrants, holy shit.
We did a whole episode on that.
Yeah. And like, it also, maybe this will be the last thing I say, but like when people talk about, like, they want to use Roman history to be like, oh, like, see, these poor people from Honduras are coming up and they're just like the Goths, and this is going to be and it's like, the Goths were like a fully organized army with weapons and leadership structures and tactics and strategies, and could go toe to toe with the legions straight up in a head-to-head battle, right? Like, that's why the Goths were what the Goths were eventually. That does not pertain right now. There are zero immigrant groups coming in to the United States of America right now with 1/1,000,000th of the military power that many of these barbarian groups had during the sort of like the transition into late antiquity in Roman history. So probably nobody listening to this podcast thinks that poor people from Honduras are just like the Goths, but they're really not. We are not actually facing anything resembling the border crises that engulf the Roman Empire during the later part of their empire.
Well, but what they don't want to understand is that this is 100% American imperialism now having to pay the tax for the way it's screwed over its neighbors. These are people who have been caught between imperialism on all sides and have suffered and are looking for a safe, soft place to land. And we have given it to people before and don't want to now.
And you can absolutely argue, and we do in our episodes on this, that these border crises, and because it was on both sides of the border, really, when you talk about the immigrant tensions inside and outside the Roman Empire, this was of the Romans' own making. Except for the part with the Huns coming down. But like, mostly.
And you know what helped the Roman Empire grow and thrive all the way back to its days as a republic? Was it integrating new peoples into their system and allowing the best of those people to rise up into the ranks and then take over and become identified with the empire itself, such that without those people, your little civilization would have collapsed long ago. And without those people, it never gets to be as big or as important as it ever was. And so we should probably stop having an ethno-nationalistic take on what makes America great. And we should look at all of these people who want to come here and make us even better.
I want to end us there because I just think there is nothing that we can possibly say that will top that. Thank you so much. I love being on a hopeful note.
That was going out on a positive note. That's not usually what I do.
I know. Jenny's like, stop trying to make it positive, Jen. I'm like, I'm trying. It's too bleak otherwise.
Yeah. People are always, is there any hope? I'm like, no, not really.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing this time with us in the dark time that we're in and helping us make sense of what is happening. And thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you whenever we see you next, whenever that will be.
Putting off replacing your window treatments because you think it's complicated? At Blinds.com, we spent 30 years proving it doesn't have to be. And right now, our Spring Black Friday sale makes it easier than ever. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 45% off site-wide. Huge savings on doorbusters. Plus a free professional measure now during the Blinds.com Spring Black Friday sale. Rules and restrictions apply.